The Porsche 911 996 generation. Is it the best 911 or is it the worst? The 996 generation of the 911 was built from 1997 to 2006. There were two generations of the 996, the 996.1 and obviously the 996.2. The 996.1 featured a 3.4 liter flat six engine that put out 296 horsepower. Those were made from 1997 to 2001. The 996.2 had the flat six 3.6 liter engine, and those were made from 2002 through 2006. The 996 had many different trim levels, of course, like most Porsches do. You could get the base level Carrera, you could get the Carrera 4, the 4S, the S, the Turbo S, the GT2, and the GT3. This generation was pre-PDK, so you could get these cars in a manual, of course, and also in a Tiptronic, which, let's be real, just on automatic. At base level, could go 0 to 60 in about 5.2 seconds with a top speed of 174 miles an hour. Obviously, better the trim level, faster the car. Now, the major difference in all of these trim levels is the engine block. There were two different engine blocks featured in this generation. The base engine block, and then the holy grail of Porsche engines, the Metzger engine. That was only featured in the Turbo and Cup cars. Brand new, these cars were all pushing $100,000 at least, if not considerably more. But nowadays, they are 20 years old, some of them over 20 years old, and they can be had for as little as about $20,000. Now, that will be a cab, automatic, fairly high mileage with a questionable maintenance history. But it will definitely be a 911, and it will not be a 911 that you could get into any cheaper than that. That is it. That is as cheap as 911 goes. 911s haven't been that cheap since, I don't know, like the 80s. So why are these cars so cheap? If they're so cheap, they must automatically be bad, right? Not exactly. They are so cheap because a few reasons. First, this is the first mass-produced vehicle that Porsche made. They made 1 million of them. So the market has a lot of these. They are not as limited in production as Porsche generations from years past. So supply and demand, there's quite a bit of supply out there. And so the demand is a little bit lower, but not just because there are so many. The demand is lower for a few different mechanical reasons. I'll start with the cosmetic one though, the headlights. When these cars came out, they used the same headlights in the 911 as were being used in the Porsche Boxster, which had just been introduced. There was a lot of carryover in the parts, not only the headlights, also a lot of the interior. To the purists, that took them by surprise. They didn't really like that a whole lot. They liked the oval headlights. That's what a Porsche had, and that's what they wanted it to continue to have. And so it took people by surprise. They didn't like it that much. But time has passed and perspectives has changed. And I can tell you, being someone who takes a 911 out to a lot of Porsche meets, I don't hear about the headlights on my car. If anything, I hear about fond memories of owning a 996 and what a great driving car that it was. So the headlights were something that took people by surprise. They are different than any other Porsche 911 generation. I can tell you from experience, they do grow on you though. That's cosmetic. Let's talk about the real car part of why there is a bit of a depression to this market. Let's talk engines. The number one thing that people talk about when they talk bad about a 996 is the IMS bearing. Now this is the intermediate shaft bearing, and the part that was used did have a higher than normal failure rate, which caused some Porsche owners to completely blow out their engine. You can imagine if you spent a lot of money on this car, and you're gonna spend a lot more than $20,000 if you bought it 10, even 15 years ago, the last thing you want is for the engine to blow up. But as I've talked to more and more 996 owners and got involved in more forums, there are very few people who have actually experienced this. Most of them, what they have experienced is actually replacing the IMS bearing. Now, replacing the IMS bearing is no easy task. It's probably not something that most people are going to be able to do in their own garage. They're going to have to take it to a shop. By itself, it's gonna be about a $4,000 repair. That's not a check that anybody wants to sign up to write. However, let's be real, it's a Porsche. If you got into a Porsche thinking that all repairs were gonna be cheap, then I don't know whose videos you were watching, but it wasn't mine. it's gonna be about a $4,000 repair. If you're gonna drive 50, 60, 70,000 miles on this car, you're probably going to replace the clutch at some point. When you replace the clutch, do the IMS bearing. It's literally pulling it out and putting the new bearing in, and it's only gonna cost the cost of the part, which is $500. I've seen the bearing. It seems like a lot for that bearing, but it's only a $500 extra expense to do it when you do the clutch. Now, the other problem with these cars is bore scoring. Bore score, and 7 years ago, somebody blew an engine and they got mad because they wasted a bunch of money on a 911. But I'm here to tell you that doesn't happen to everybody. Bore scoring is bad and it causes catastrophic engine failure. So that is certainly one of the flaws of this car, because the block had thin aluminum walls, so it's easier to have bore scoring. So I'm sure that leaves you thinking this video is saying that it is the worst 911. Well, now it's time to talk about the good. Why is it good to have a car that has IMS problems and bore scoring? Well, bore scoring, one, doesn't happen to every one of these cars. Two, if it does happen, it will cause a catastrophic engine failure and you will have to rebuild the engine. That's gonna cost you probably about $20,000. Maybe some more than that, depending on how much you wanna amp it up, which would be very easy to do when you were having to rebuild the engine. So you bought a car for $20,000, had some bore scoring, you have to replace the motor now, and now you have a car you spent $40,000 on. But not just any car, you have a 911. A really badass 911 with a brand new engine in it. The other beauty of this car, even though it's 20 years old, it's really getting to be a classic, and Porsche supports this classic vehicle. So you can take your 911 to a Porsche dealership and get it worked on. Even better, you can buy parts from the Porsche dealership. New parts, not new old stock, new parts that they are currently manufacturing for this car. So this is an analog Porsche. This is the first generation of the liquid-cooled Porsche 911. Prior to that, all air-cooled, and there is not much technology in this car. It does have an ECM, but it's not all tied into the radio as the centralized brain of the car, like they started doing in the 997s and generations after that. If all of this seems like a giant pain to you, and you are not in for any of this, I got a pro tip for you. Right now, as we speak, you can find yourself a 996 Turbo Coupe with a Tiptronic for around $50,000. Now that car has a Metzger engine in it, does not have IMS problems, so you don't have to deal with the major catastrophic engine fears of IMS and bore scoring. And the beauty of it is, those cars are bound to go up. Remember, analog car, great car to be able to work on, and the current trend is moving back towards smaller vehicles. Cars have gotten way too big and people don't love them as much. So they're getting back to smaller vehicles like the 997 and the 996 in years prior. Air-cooled, man, you're in a different stratosphere. You spend a ton of money. Yeah, those are small cars, but you gotta have some big bank for that. These are affordable cars, and I think that the Turbo is one that if you pick them up right now, you're gonna make some money on it. So, is the 996 the best 911 or the worst 911? Me, I think it's the best value 911 right now. Nobody can take it away from you. It is a 911. It's got the classic flat six in it. It falls right in line with the motor going up. This isn't your Mustang 2 that came out with a V6 in it. This is a real 911 and it performs like a 911. So if you pick one up right now, I think you can make a bunch of money on it, but for sure, you can have a ton of fun with it right now. That's what I think. Leave some comments below. Make sure you subscribe. Let us know what you think about 996s and come back and see us next time.